Thank you guys for participating in my informal survey about what berries mean to you. We'll discuss that in a minute. Raise your hand if you call yourself a professional botanist. All right, Carl. So just for you two, mostly, and Ren. So for you two, we're not splitting stipules about what berry means in this talk. A berry, we're considering any fleshy fruit. If you want to know what technically counts as a berry, talk to Carl and Blaine after this, and they'll tell you all about the ovaries and whether they're subtending the blah, blah, blah. But, so right now we're talking about any fleshy fruit that a plant will make that animals like to eat, including us. So, Althea said, I grew up here in Fairbanks, and I challenge any other speaker in the Discover Alaska series to have a more delicious topic than this. And we are hot on, raise your hand if you've picked raspberries already. Yes. Izzy and Simone, we were picking them last night at our cabin. Raise your hand if you've picked blueberries already. Some, they're coming on quick. Get ready, don't miss it. And this is a picture that my husband took. He is a plant ecologist, and that's his water bottle that he does in the field while the soil scientists are digging their holes. He's picking berries and identifying the plants. So this also is a very a good talk for puns. We're gonna, thanks for joining this berry science jam session. What else? Christina, what other puns do we do? This is a very interesting topic, right? Yes, yes.
A lot of the berries with students' name are named Bob, which could be bushels of berries.
Bushels, yes. There's lots of puns, and when you're in this work, it's deliciously rich. It's sweet for the picking, the puns. So what do berries mean to you? I just did an informal poll, and I walked around and talked to most of you as you were coming in. This is what you said berries mean to you. Yum, sweet, free food for foraging. That was 4 words, not just one, but I like it. A lot of people said free. More than one person said free. Snack, healthy. More than one person said antioxidants. Summer, lots of people said summer. Fun, happiness, Christmas, he'll have to explain that one to you. Christmas, nutrition, cultivation, tradition, happiness, picking, backyard, food, jelly, subsistence, peace and quiet, adventure, gift from the earth, freedom. So berries mean a lot to us, and all of us know a lot about berries. We all have some experience, and when Christy Buffington, one of my collaborators, when we go to classrooms all over Alaska to work with students on berry research, every child in this state has a story to share about berries. All of us have a story to share about berries. And mine started right here in Fairbanks. That's my mom and dad in the 80s. There they are now. You can do before and after. And was that Estradome, Mom? Yeah. Cute. You are looking cute, Mom. And that's me. And we, for us, tradition is a big word for what berries mean to our family. We don't try to stock up on berries. We don't do 5 gallons or anything like that. But we pick them for the fun of it, for the tradition of it, for the healthy snack that you can feed your children. But berries mean a lot to so many people in Alaska. So Jerry Hupp, who is one of my friends and colleagues, he works at USGS, well, he recently retired. He surveyed folks from around the state of Alaska, and he found that on average, rural Alaskan households are picking 20 gallons of berries every summer. 20 gallons, imagine that. That's like 5-gallon buckets, right? 4 of them all lined up. That's what, on average, a rural household is picking. And a lot of them are salmon berries, so it takes a little bit less time to fill a bucket because they're bigger berries. But, and in each region of our state, the types of berries that are important to people are different. So Jerry he surveyed over 100 environmental coordinators from villages throughout Alaska. So over 100 villages were represented. And he asked them, which berries are most important to you? And in the interior, as you might expect, some of the berries we already mentioned, raspberries, blueberries, low bush cranberry, and high bush cranberry were the ones that were the most important to people. And then in the tundra region, salmon berries, which some people around here called cloudberries, blueberries, and what we call crowberries in this part of Alaska, but in other parts of Alaska they call them blackberries, or what else are they called? Some people, mossberries is what they call them on St. Paul Island. Yeah, there are bearberries, but we could talk about that. Ask Carl. No, I'm just teasing. And low bush cranberries. And then on the coast, what they call salmon berries, which are a high bush berry. They have high bush blueberries, huckleberries, and crowberries were the ones that they said were the most important to them. And it's not just us that cares about berries. Animals that migrate, such as geese and shorebirds, animals that hibernate. We all know that bears love to stock up on berries before they go into hibernation for those essential nutrients. Voles, foxes, hares, and then winter residents too. So there are so many animals that are eking by their existence during the winter months, and they are relying on berries for a vital burst of nutrients. So just like us, a lot of you guys said, antioxidants, the health quality, it's a healthy snack. And berries are, in fact, a superfood for us and for animals. Some of the studies from across the street here in the Arctic Health Research Building show that people who harvest and eat wild Alaskan berries, they suffer dementia at lower rates, they suffer diabetes at lower rates, and obesity at lower rates. And so this really, truly is a superfood for us in Alaska. And it's not just the act of eating the berries, but the act of picking them that also influences those rates. So when we're thinking about who's eating the berries, this is another study that Jerry Hupp, and he quantified in the YK Delta region how many of the berries were getting eaten by migrating animals, and mostly geese. And what he found was about half of the berries in the whole crop, and he studied blackberries, which are crowberries and Peachum nigrum, half of them are getting eaten by wildlife. And then the other almost half stay on the plant and are frozen. Who do you think would love to eat those frozen berries in the winter? Voles, exactly. Who else? They're under the snow. They're looking for that little nugget of superfood. So those frozen berries are really important. And then when we think about wildlife eating the berries, there is a ripple effect for us again. Number one, those things that we like to hunt, especially this is YK Delta region, they're eating the berries. And so with that berry harvest there, that it ensures that the migrating animals will stop and that those people will have something to hunt when they stop. It also affects our tourism. So, this bear on the Kenai Refuge was eating berries, and then it provided a tourism opportunity for people. So I was wondering if you have personally noticed any changes in berries. So the title of this talk is Alaska's Wild Berries and our Changing Seasons. I'm going to ask you to turn to the person sitting next to you or the group of 3 sitting next to you and just discuss, for you each have 30 seconds, you and the person sitting next to you, what changes have you noticed in berries since you've been picking them? So 30 seconds, turn to the person sitting near you. What changes have you noticed? All right. I'm going to pick on our undergrad students. Well, actually, you just got here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can say
My mom's picking somebody. Pass them the mic, Mom. What changes have you noticed?
I don't know if it's changes or just an observation of drier summers versus wetter summers or springs, and the timing and the quantity. But
Okay. So changes in rain, drier seasons. You had changes in the quantity and changes in the timing. 3 biggies. Okay. Do you want to volunteer somebody now since we're volunteer? John Smelter. Anybody been picking berries for longer than 20 years in the Fairbanks area? Would you be willing to share some of your observations? So we got the boom busts. There's either good years or bad years, timing, abundance, and would you say that abundance has increased or decreased over the years? Ooh, increased. Anybody else? Depends where you're picking. Oh, okay. All right. And this is my daughter Simone, and she was working with me on a bud project where we were looking at whether the buds had anything to do with the changes in berries. So like some of you, when Jerry asked the environmental coordinators in over 100 villages what changes people were observing in their villages, similar, especially low bush blueberry. So this represents the percent of people that said that they were either more abundant, no change, more variable, or less abundant. And this is representative of the polar ecoregion, but it was just true in the interior and the coastal region as well. And low bush blueberry was the one that people thought was more variable than it had been in the past when they were little, 20 or 30 years ago. Cloudberry was also more variable. Very few people thought that berries were more abundant than they were in the past. And very few people thought that they were necessarily less abundant, but more variable seemed to be the trend in people's responses. And when Jerry went and he looked at the overall production of how many berries, he would put out these plots on the YK Delta and how many crowberries were in there year to year. And he studied it starting in 1999 when I was graduating from high school and stopped in 2007. And he found that there was huge variation in production in the YK, or in Eisenbeck Wildlife Refuge. Where is that? Where's Eisenbeck? On the peninsula, okay. So me and my friend Krista Mulder, we thought maybe the timing of the seasons could be influencing this variability that people were talking about. Either really good years, really bad years, maybe the timing's shifting. And so this is Krista, and this is me. I'm pregnant with Isabel Spellman, a ripe berry in my tummy. It was... And we started exploring that when I started as a PhD student working on this project. And it's not just me and Krista that have been doing this. We have over 1,000 collaborators working with us to study berries, including some seated in this audience. And we work with volunteers across the state because UAF is here in Fairbanks, but berries are changing or being perceived to be changing around the state. And so we have 3 different citizen science projects that I will talk to you about. Citizen science is when professional scientists collaborate with anybody who wants to collaborate to conduct formal scientific research. So you can see all the places that we are working with volunteers and a lot of students. So the birth of a berry is a miracle. When you stop and you think of the life cycle of a berry, and this figure was made by one of our grad students, Lindsay Parkinson, in collaboration with a graphic designer, the birth of a berry is a miracle. Every step in its life cycle, there could be something that goes wrong and cause that boom bust. Why is it that in the same place there was berries last year and I could pick for hours and never get all of them, and then the next year go back and there's nothing? Why? And when you stop and you think, every single stage in the life cycle, something could go wrong that makes a berry not form. And so starting in the bud phase, the plant is making its bud the year before it actually flowers. So right now, the berry plants already have buds on them that they're saving for next year. Just like any good Alaskan, we pack our cash, right? We stock up. Me and my husband are driving down to Chitina. We're going to freeze our salmon, and we're stocking up for the long winter. These plants are doing the same thing, and we can learn a lot from them. So the buds are formed. They keep their buds underneath the snow. So you can imagine, at that point, what could go wrong? Not enough snow, right? You might not get enough snow cover, and your buds could die. Or you, and if let's say your bud survives, the next part in the story, right, is if it's springtime and your flowers open, what could go wrong then? Maybe you get an ice storm in the spring and all your flowers get knocked off. Maybe, a lot of you guys mentioned drought and dryness. Maybe it's so dry that the petals of the flower just fry. And we hear a lot of stories of that in our research, of the flowers just drying up. Maybe you flower too early and the pollinators aren't out yet. The pollinators aren't ready and you miss them. Maybe an invasive species comes into town and they take the pollinators away from the berries and they're competing. So, and all those things would prevent you from getting pollinated and you don't make a berry. Did you know that blueberries and cranberries, they have to be buzz pollinated in order to make a fruit? So they actually have to get a buzz. They can't just get wind knocked into them. So think a pollinator. If you enjoy your blueberry pie, think a pollinator. And then the next stage, let's say you do get pollinated. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we actually tried to replicate it in the lab where you take a tuning fork and you try to get the right frequency and you put it in the flower. So it actually requires the shaking to release the pollen from the anthers. So is that the right botanical term, Carl? Yes? Okay. All right. Ecologists and botanists do a lot of the same things, but not all the same things. We don't split hairs as much as you guys. Sorry. And then let's say you do get pollinated, and then you have to have enough resources to make a berry. I heard Althea talking to somebody in the audience about, are your berries big or are they little? How's this dry weather affecting the size, right? So water, light, nutrients, all those things are going to make a difference for whether or not you make a berry after you've gotten pollinated or not. And the plant can actually choose whether or not they're going to abort a fruit or retain it. So they're making these decisions based on the resource availability. And then, let's say they make a berry, then we get the chance to pick them. What else could happen to a berry after it's ripened and nice and beautiful? One idea. Roger, what could happen? Something eats it. So something besides a human could eat it. What else could happen? It falls off, yep. And what would happen once it's on the ground? Rot. Yeah, so bacteria could get it, and it would start to rot. Fungus could get it. Everything loves berries. I tell Izzy, everything loves berries. We were finding little worms in the berries that we were picking yesterday. Everything loves berries because they're so sweet and they're superfoods. So it could go to rot, it could go to animals, or it could just freeze on the bush and be there in the winter for those animals that are. Yes, Izzy?
Well, what if the berry, it gets, I think I actually ate a worm.
I know. Ah! So that's another possibility. Your child could be a host. Yes. So in our changing seasons, what we know about our seasons, so we're trying to piece together this puzzle, could our changing climate affect each of those phases of the life cycle? And we've got a couple of different projects that are trying to piece together that full story for the life cycle of a berry plant to see what is affecting our berries and what is making us observe that the variability in our berry harvests. So we have changes in the timing of rain and snow and the amount. We have warmer growing seasons, longer growing seasons, 21 days more than in 1928. And that's based on a trend line, not just comparing one low date and one high date, right? So we know that things are changing. So can you imagine, so here's like a life cycle of our blueberry, starting with the bud and getting into the ripe. If we get earlier springs, then we're going to get earlier flowers, earlier ripening of berries, and what are the consequences for us? So as we know, climate change could affect so many different aspects of the berry's life cycle. And so we started out just piecing together the timing of berry life cycle to begin with. This is Izzy when she was a baby, and Krista Mulder's son Ewan, and we were pushing strollers around, and we decided we were going to track 8 species of berries from the beginning of their life cycle to the end of their life cycle in the fall, and see what we could figure out just about the general timing and what would happen in warmer summers and cooler summers. So what we found, these arrows are when the snow melted in 2013, 14, and 15. That was a lot of pushing the stroller. We did it every week for the entire summers across those 3 years, and we tracked when they flowered, when they fruited, when they ripened. And so we found that snow melt predicted a lot. In a year where the snow melted earlier, we got peak flowering earlier, so that was 2015. In a year where the snow melted later, we had snow sticking around for a really long time in 2013, then the peak flowering was later. And it was pretty similar pattern when we looked at fruit. So this was the date where half of the berries were ripe and half of them were unripe still. And same pattern, earlier. So we know that berries, if you get earlier snow melt, it's going to push the whole life cycle up a little bit. And then we wanted to see if there was any pattern through time. Had this changed over 100 years? So Krista, she went to herbariums. Do you guys know what an herbarium is? It's a place where they store pressed plants for hundreds of years. Like there's specimens in Europe that are like 200 years old, and they press them, they dry them, and then each spot has a date that it was collected, who collected it, and a location note, either like some kind of special, like near the church on the top of the hill in Scotland, or some city in Scotland, or a GPS location. So Krista went and she gathered all these herbarium specimens, and she looked at whether, compared to the trend, whether they had earlier or later flowering. So above the 0 line are years when blueberries flowered earlier than normal, and below the line are the years when the berries flowered later than normal.
Was that in Alaska?
We did it at a continental scale, and then we did it at Alaska scale. And in both cases, low bush cranberry was pretty steady. And when you think about it, low bush cranberry, they don't lose their leaves. They have a pretty conservative living strategy. So they don't lose their leaves. They're an more or less evergreen species. And their timing was pretty steady over the past 100 years. When you looked at blueberry, most of you who picked blueberries wouldn't be surprised that they were pretty variable through time, and that we found that it was increasing in the variability as you got into the 1980s to present. And so we definitely saw increasing variation in the timing of blueberries. So that's pretty important. And so Krista went on to look at whether or not it could be explained just by temperature. And she found that, as you might expect, when the temperature was warmer in the summer, then things were earlier. The phenology, or the timing of life events for a berry plant, was earlier. And when it was cooler in that summer, then it was delayed. But she couldn't explain everything. She couldn't explain all the variation when she looked at those patterns. And so she thought maybe the year before flowering was important, because they're making those buds the year before. And so the conditions, the temperature and the moisture in the year before might be important. And she found indeed it was. And that years that were warmer, they had delayed phenology. So it could explain a lot more of the variation. So that's why you see the opposite pattern for the year before. So that led to a study that she roped me into, that looking at whether or not those buds that are formed the year before, whether or not that had any explanatory power on why berries are more variable than they were in the past. And she partnered with Pam Diggle from the University of Connecticut, and me and a grad student. So this is like the in vitro photo of a berry. It's pretty phenomenal. They dissect the buds at the University of Connecticut. They dissect the buds, and this is what those buds look like before the snow hits. So they dissected those buds, and they can actually see how far along the buds are, just like we can when we get our 6-month checkup when we're pregnant, and you get your, you can see how far along your baby's developing. So they're beautiful. And we also noticed when we were in the field studying cranberries, we noticed that a lot of the flowers would pop in the fall. Have any of you guys noticed strange flowering before the winter? Yeah. So we thought this was really strange because, number one, you're not going to make a fruit. If you're starting to flower in August, as these were, there's no way you're going to make a fruit in time to get another set of fruit out before the snow falls. So we were like, what is going on? And we thought that maybe the development of the buds, if spring came earlier, then the buds could develop a little bit too far along when the fall hit. So longer growing seasons, could it make these buds a little bit too far developed? And so they set up an experiment, Pam and Krista, and they set up these little greenhouses where they actually warmed up some spots of ground to see if they could get the buds to develop a little bit farther along. And they had me set up a citizen science program where we asked volunteers, and we could use your help. We asked volunteers to do a couple of things to see if their results of their greenhouse experiment were representative of a larger area in Alaska. And so we have people collecting winter buds of low bush cranberry. So if you're ever outside in the fall time and you see the buds going dormant or after the first snow, we will take any samples that you would send us. We ask people to take at least 10. And we also ask people to report their observations of late blooming plants. And you can do that through the Leo Observer. Has anybody participated in Leo before? It's the local environmental observers network, and they have an app, and you just snap a picture of really any strange environmental phenomena that you observe, and then it gets archived and scientists use it. Yeah. So this is your mission if you want to join the citizen science movement and help understand why berries are changing in Alaska. You can download the Leo app. I can help you afterwards if you need. Christy can help you afterwards if you need. Making the undergrads do it too. Christine and Caroline. Look for the local environmental observers app, and you can send any pictures that you have of those weird flowers this fall, starting today. Anything you see flowering. And then collecting the winter buds, we asked people to send in 10 stems of low bush cranberry. And then they get their own personal in vitro scanning electron microscope, in utero, scanning electron microscope picture of their own bud, which is pretty sweet and special, and you can hang it on your fridge. That's my bud. So let's say your buds aren't changing, and we don't know the results of that experiment yet. It's ongoing. They just pulled the greenhouses this summer. Let's say that the buds weren't affected. Then how might the flowers be affected? And this was my PhD dissertation work, where we looked at whether or not a newly introduced invasive species was affecting the pollination of our wild cranberries. And we see that climate could affect pollination directly by changing the weather, which impacts pollinators. Pollinators fly more and pollinate more on days that are not cold and rainy. And we also know that the changes in the timing of the flowering could cause that mismatch between the pollinators and the timing of the flowers. And then there's also these indirect effects, because invasive species could be introduced and compete with the cranberries and blueberries for the same pollinators that they need to buzz pollinate. So we set up an experiment where we put, very carefully, we put white sweet clover, an invasive species that you see commonly on the roadways. We put it out in some sites, and we pulled them before they set seed. This was in the Bonanza Creek Long-Term Ecological Research Program forest. And we looked at whether or not they were pollinated and with what kind of pollen. And we looked at whether or not the cranberries set fruit. And we found that when we added the invasive species, the pollinator community did change. That in the sites where sweet clover wasn't, we only had bumblebees and solitary bees. And in the spots where we added sweet clover, we attracted a whole new set of pollinators, butterflies and wasps and syrphid flies. So a whole new cast of characters came to pollinate. And one of the things that we noticed that the percent of the flowers that were pollinated didn't change when we added the sweet clover, but the quality of the pollen did. So those butterflies were not as, they're not as faithful to a single species per foraging run. So they were transferring lower quality pollen to the cranberries when sweet clover was added. So we looked at it at a very large scale, at a 40-meter scale. We had 40-meter radius plots. And we thought, well, maybe we didn't see any changes because we were looking too big. And when we added the sweet clover, within minutes, the bumblebees and butterflies would swarm us. They could smell it. Within minutes, we saw such pollinator activity. And we're like, this can't be that it didn't change the amount of flowers pollinated. So we looked at a closer scale, and we found that there was actually a magnet effect. We were looking too big. And when we narrowed our scope and looked at the changes across a distance, then we saw that the sweet clover was actually benefiting the cranberry plants that were right next to it, but to the detriment of the cranberry plants farther away. So this is what our graph looks like. The control where we didn't add sweet clover is the dotted line. And so right next to the sweet clover is added at that 0 point in our plots. And right next to it, the plants with sweet clover, the Mel 40, we added 2 different densities of sweet clover, and the Mel 120, 120 plants, they had greater pollination right there in the center of our plots than did our controls, but to the detriment of the plants farther away. So less pollen for the plants farther away. So we started thinking, well, okay, we know that they're acting as a magnet. So if the flowers are blooming at exactly the same time, we would expect a stronger effect than if the flowers were not overlapping in their timing. Like there's enough for everybody, enough pollinators for everybody if sweet clover blooms after the cranberries and blueberries. So we set up a project using volunteer help around the state of Alaska to look at whether or not there were certain climate regions of Alaska where the overlap was greater. And Josh, I'm looking at you. Josh started making the maps, and we never gave him the edits to the model. But so this is the preliminary results. So we used those herbarium data that Krista had collected to model the flowering times across both Alaska and the northern part of the United States. And then within Alaska, we set up a citizen science program where we had people tracking weekly the timing of flowering of the invasive plant and the berry plants, blueberry and cranberry. And we found that in the Pacific Maritime region, that southern coast, vetch is purple, sweet clover is green, glowbush cranberry is red, and blueberry is blue. That there was a lot of overlap between vetch flowering time and our blueberries and cranberries in that part of the state. In the interior of Alaska, which is that second box there, the blueberries didn't overlap very much with sweet clover or with vetch, just a tiny bit. So you figure they were probably getting adequately pollinated, and that the effects might be lessened here in the interior compared to the Pacific Maritime. And then in the Western Arctic, they don't have sweet clover in the tundra region yet, but there are a few locations of vetch right now. Do you guys know about vetch? I know those guys do because they've been counting nodules for a week. Vetch is that purple climbing invasive plant that is all over the UAF campus. And so, those species that overlapped pretty substantially with the glowbush cranberry and just a little bit with the blueberry in the Western Arctic. Oop. And then so finally, one last life phase that we're studying is what happens from that phase between summer. So let's say we got pollinated and we're on our way to make a berry, and we make a berry. So what happens to the berries in the fall? And most people stop thinking about berries after the fall, after we've picked them. We're like, done, in the freezer, ready for Christmas to make my cranberry sauce, right? And so we started thinking, especially we had a lot of teachers. We have, how many students, Christy? 28 classrooms around the state of Alaska participating in this project. And the teachers were like, yeah, that cool project about the pollinators was great, except for school starts after that. And so how can we participate in this research? Because every kid has a story about berries. How can we participate and get our kids involved? So we thought, let's do a fall project. That's the last part of the life cycle that we haven't hit yet. And we're asking the question, does this extended growing season, earlier spring and later fall, does that change the fate of berries? So can I ask for, I need 3 volunteers. Christy, I'm asking you. Andy, I know you're a good actress. Come on up. If I know your name, you're in danger. Would you be willing? Would you be willing? Yeah, I need 3 volunteers. We're gonna act out the scenario that we're trying to test. What happens if, okay, you're gonna be the berry because you're nice and blue. So you're gonna be a bird, a ptarmigan, okay? Ptarmigan, get in character, Andy. All right, okay? Josh, I'm glad I did, you're lucky. And you're gonna be a fox, okay? So foxes actually eat quite a bit of berries. Oh, my foxcat picture was earlier. Yeah, foxes eat quite a bit of berries. If you look at foxcat in the fall, chock full of berries. So you like berries, but you also like ptarmigan. Oh, yes. Get into character. Okay, how do you act foxy? Yes, all right, he's foxy. Okay, come on over here. So, okay, animals, wait for a moment. We're gonna focus the story on the berries. So, Christy is a nice blueberry. Christy, in the spring, in a normal spring, okay, you guys get off stage for a second and I'll call you on. You're very good. I picked 2 wonderful actors and actresses. All right, but the star of our show is the berries. Okay, this is a normal year, and in a normal year, Christy, you, the beautiful blueberry, you've made your buds at the normal time. Go ahead and make your buds. Yes. Yes. Yep. She's getting her waters. Her buds were prepared before, so she's ready. All she needs is to suck up that water, and her cells will expand. She's got her buds ready. She's open. The pollinators came at the right time. Bzz, bzz, right? And she has started to make an unripe fruit at her normal time that she always usually does. And it starts to ripen. Along comes some ptarmigan. So the green berries are hard to find, but once they're blue, she's ready. Ptarmigan, go. And she's eating the white blueberries. The fox comes along and he's ready. He's like, okay, he's gonna eat some berries. He's also gonna eat some ptarmigan. All right, good job. And how do you guys feel as animals in this ecosystem?
I feel good.
You feel good? You're like, okay, Andy, you're dead.
I'm dead.
Okay. And you've passed on your seeds to the next generation, right?
Yeah, but I was scared at first because I didn't want to be trampled. But then again, they did a good job, and then the people come.
Oh, yes, all right. We get whatever's left, because we know from Jerry, 50% of it's gone by the time. Yeah. So, all right, that was Act 1. Act 2, are you guys ready? So this year, spring comes early, just as it is on average. 21 days longer of a growing season here in Fairbanks. All right, good job, Christy. So spring comes early. The snow has melted. She's ready. She's got her buds out. And pollinators, we're waiting. We don't have any data on this yet, so it's not part of the story. We don't know the timing of the pollinators. That could be our next project. But okay, the pollinators are coming early, because they came out early too, we're pretending. And then she's ripening early. They're not ready. Ptarmigan aren't around. They're not ready yet. We're not ready. We're down in Chittenden getting our fish, and we're not ready. They're early. We didn't drive out to our spot. And then she starts to rot. The berries are falling off. They're gone. All right. Along comes the ptarmigan. What's going on? She's looking for berries. What do you find? No, Andy, good acting. Way to emote. Excellent. All right, it's all rotten. She's not there. Fox, come along. No. Where's the ptarmigan? Where's the berries? Fox. All right, no. So with the earlier springs, the berries were rotting. How did you feel this time, Fox?
I'm pretty hungry.
Oh no.
There wasn't enough to eat.
Oh, so, all right. Thank you. Give them a round of applause for illustrating the scientific principle. Thank you. So that's the question we're testing. What happens? What is the fate of those berries? And then what are the consequences for the fox and for the ptarmigan and for all those people that depend on the timing, because the timing of berry ripening might conflict with other activities that we do in the late summer and the fall. We, as people, have to start to make choices. Are we gonna go get fish? Are we gonna go get berries, especially if the timing is changing and they're starting to overlap? So that's the science question. We're also testing an education research question, and we want to know if having personal connections, because telling stories is a big part of when you're out berry picking. You know, you're talking with your family, it's a tradition. It's also a big, important piece of teaching and learning is telling stories. And so we're testing whether or not storytelling has an effect on the way that kids learn and participate in science. So we use that activity, me and Christy, when we go to classrooms, we use, and my mother, Chris Villano, is our master educator on the project. She said, start with a story, Katie. And so we use that story also to get the kids interested in what the science question is. And we're testing whether or not that makes a difference in whether kids are learning. So we go all across the state, and right now we have over 1,080 participants in 28 communities. And they track what happens, as berries are ripening at the very beginning of the school year. What happens to those berries? Are they staying unripe? Are they ripening? Are they rotting? Are they getting eaten by something or falling to the ground? And so those are the kinds of data that they collect. And so this is one of the preliminary figures from our first year of data. And we haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty because we're still collecting data. We got one more year of data collection for this project. But within our first year, we found, so the green line, this is the percent berries remaining and the date that percentage was observed by the average of classrooms in the interior of Alaska, or it's that families homeschool. It's not just classrooms, 4-H clubs, Girl Scouts, my own family, Christy's own family, how many they observed. And in the interior, which is the green line, we lose our berries at a faster rate than in the southern boreal forests, like Anchorage, Wasilla, that region. And we think our next step is to look at the climate variables associated with berry loss, and whether or not it's going to rot or getting lost or getting nipped by insects and birds. But you can imagine in a place where fall and winter come more quickly, that you would want to drop your berries a little bit sooner. You also can imagine that animals migrating from the north are coming through, and so you might expect the berries in interior Alaska to get eaten more quickly by migratory animals earlier, not more quickly, earlier than in the Anchorage, Wasilla boreal region. So preliminary results, stay tuned. We'll be cranking out more of these. And then to test that storytelling question, we have classrooms get assigned, we pull their names out of a hat, and they either get a distance delivered interaction, which is just a very basic training, and then they go out and they collect data and then report back, and versus highly supported, where we send an education expert and a scientist out to the site to help them set it up. And then the third method that we're testing against those two methods is whether or not storytelling makes a difference in the learning and the outcomes. And so to do that, we worked with two folks that do different types of storytelling, and my mother came up with one of the phases too. So the first is just sharing your knowledge with your community. And to do that, we host community storytelling events in those communities, and people share their stories. Everybody that we've met has a story to share about berries. Some are funny, some are sad, some are about changes, some are about delicious food. Everybody has a story to share, and we share them using this craft activity that Sarah Stanley from the English department has proposed as a way to get people to tell and share their stories. And then, So this is the kid, this is a teacher in Shishmaref and a parent and a student telling the same story that you just saw elegantly acted out by our voluntoads. Sorry. and they use storytelling in the learning activities. Then this is an activity that my mom developed on how do you share your science experience as a story. And so the students share their science experiences and also use that same felt storytelling technique. And and the data's in there, but they're trying to tell it as a rich story. We're trying to create people that can communicate science in a less boring way than the average scientist. And so we encourage the kids to use emotion in their storytelling, not in the data, but in the storytelling of their experience, and trying to create this sense of place when you're telling the story. And then they incorporate what they still are wondering in their story. And then we record it, and kids are sharing it on in our story gallery on our website. So if you Google Winterberry UAF, you can see the stories of the students and their families. And then with the help of Doug Cost from the School of Education here at UAF. See, it's so great to share positive stories about UAF right now. I'm like, yes, we're doing good things, guys. He helped us develop an activity where we compare the data from across multiple climate regions so that if we know what's projected for our place or for wherever place it is, maybe Metlakatla or Shishmaref or Anaktuvik Pass, they look at communities that have collected data that are similar to what is projected for their climate in their place, and they imagine what the future for berries will look like. And so we compare two different possible futures, a do-nothing future and a do-something future. And they brainstorm and prioritize and vote. That's what the sticky dots are for. They vote on the actions that they've come up with themselves to steward berries into the future. How do we deal with this changing variability? Do the kids want their kids to be able to pick berries? And so when my mom goes into the classroom, she always has the kids close their eyes. And then she says, okay, imagine yourself 20 years from now. And do you have a Fu Manchu? Do you have 10 kids? Are you gonna be president of the United States? Are you gonna, so imagine yourself in the future, and then how are you gonna dictate the future that you want, the desirable future? So, and then they share their project results with their community or with a science community. Like these students from Bethel shared at the Alaska Forum on the Environment. So what are these kids imagining for the future? How are they gonna prepare us to preserve berries for the future? And so this is Madeline, and this is a student from the Shishmaref Climate Heroes Club. And she wrote up what the results. She's a third grader. She wrote up the results from their study site, and she got first place in the Alaska Science and Engineering Fair in Anchorage. So for her, it was just documenting that change is happening. Shishmaref is a poster child for climate change in our state and the world, and erosion is the issue, but that's too big for a third grader to handle. And so she did, her and her club leader did berries because it's something that is manageable for a little kid. So there's Madeline. And this is our friend Terry and Venatai. And so those kids, when they were imagining the future, which for them is a short time scale, these are kindergarten through second graders. So for them, the future is like when they're in the fourth grade. And they imagined, so some of them had seen jars of jelly, just like somebody said on what berries mean to them, it means jelly. They had seen jars of jelly in their grandma's cabinet that had dust on the top. And so for them, preserving berries in times of variability of highs and lows was jarring the berries so that it could be, next year when my grandma, if it's a bad berry year, then at least they have the jam that our class made. And so that's what they chose for their action. And they made a heck of a lot of jam. Mom, it took a lot of time, didn't it? 3 days. We took the seeds. They were studying rosehip, so they made rosehip jam. That is laborious. And they hand-delivered throughout their village jars of jam to every elder in that village so that it could be preserved for them, for their short-term future. And then, so after doing that storytelling activity where they imagine 2 different futures, this is Allison Wild's class, and some of you guys may know her. She's a farmer, and she runs a booth at the farmer's market, and she teaches at Two Rivers Elementary. And some of the kids were like, we need buffer species. And we were like, okay, I like this idea, I like where it's going. And they thought that, so we have our wild berries that may not be as reliable as they were in the past, but what about cultivated berries? You know, could we, in years where our native berries are not producing, could we produce berries ourselves so that we could have a buffer and still get our fresh, free fruit, free for food for foraging, delicious on my cereal, high antioxidants, berries. So they grew honeyberries in their classroom. Do you guys know honeyberries? They're delicious. Blaine planted 6 bushes in our yard. John Smelter's got some in his yard, and they come on. Phenology-wise, the timing, they come on just before blueberries and they ripen, and they are a delicious alternative. So they planted them in their school garden, and that was their idea for dealing with these times of variability and uncertainty in their berry harvest. So pretty cool for like 5th graders to think up that idea and actually carry it out. So we think, like, what do berries mean to you? Do we want them for a future? This is my daughter Isabel, and you know, since she just could learn how to walk, 18 months old, we've been taking her berry picking, sometimes to the same place that my parents took us berry picking. And do we want that for our kids? What do we want to do to preserve these special foods, delicious, sweet, yummy, happy, tradition, good, life, peace and quiet? These foods, do we want to preserve them for our future? So, thank you very much. Oh man, let's go.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about buds that form and then they form the berry for the next year.
Yes.
I've heard that using those scooper things that people use, that those knock the buds off so the berry doesn't form the next year. Is that true?
I think it depends on the species that you're using them on. So for like glowbush cranberry, those are very small. What species do you use them on?
Well, just the blueberry, those scoops with the forks in them, you know?
Yeah, the bear claw one. I would say that the blueberries were probably more vulnerable because the buds are, where's Carl? Those buds are pretty close in. I think that they're, unless the stem is getting ripped, they protect those buds pretty well. Yeah. Yeah, but leaf matter. Yeah, if the stem is staying intact, then the buds will they're so close to the stem, you know? Yeah, good question. Another study. Write that one down, Caroline.
Can you talk about honeybees versus just native bees? I mean, would it be a good thing to have honeybees to promote pollination? I've also heard that they run away other bees. So, I don't know.
So they just need anything that can buzz pollinate, right? So honey, I don't think that they necessarily care who's doing it. The bumblebees are very efficient pollinators for berries. They pack a lot of pollen, and the extra hairs provide extra surface for the pollen to stick to. So in terms of pollen per trip, bumblebees are gonna out carry pollen relative to honeybees. But honeybees, the numbers, you know, if you have an imported hive, the numbers are gonna be really high. So, yeah, that's a really good question. Luckily, in Alaska, we don't really think about that too much, you know, outside of the urban areas. Yes?
There seems to be a drop in population of bees and wasps in the past, 4, 5, 6 years. Has that had an effect on berry growth?
So that's on the radar for The USGS, who Jerry Hupp used to work for, there's a research team that is setting up long-term monitoring sites. We don't know. There's like only a handful of people that study pollination in the whole state of Alaska. And nobody's actually like done a thorough job on it. We did our little study, but we were manipulating the system. So I'm sure, less pollinators means less berries. We know from our own research we did 2 years. In the year where pollinators couldn't fly as much because it was rainy weather, we had less berry production, hands down.
We're noticing some raspberries, when you pick them, the cone that's left behind, if it's white, the berry is sweet. If it's dark or murky, then the berry's quite tart and sour. What is that, a bacterial infection, a genetic thing? The birds are leaving behind the ones that we can't tell if they're sour until we pick them and look. But the birds avoid them. So when you go to a raspberry bush that has berries left on it right now, they're all sour. They got the good ones. How can they tell that from outside?
That's amazing. Write that one down, Caroline. That's a very good question. I don't know. Anybody else know about any research on that? No. Yeah, that's a cool observation. This is how science is born. You got it. That's cool. That's actually how we got onto berries as people. So our very first study was the invasive species versus berries and pollination question. And every time we presented that research, people only were asking questions about the berries. It was like, the invasive species, whatever. Like, yeah, that's important, except for what about our berries? So then we shifted our research trajectory to be more berries because of the questions. So you got that? You wrote it down, Caroline? That's your next project. Yes, Christina.
So since we are studying birdage, right? So
Yeah.
while I'm walking around, I see that a lot of like raspberries and different berries are getting buried underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
So with the birdage taking over Alaska, and it's taking the pollinators also. So is that affecting the berries' growth too? Because they're taking the pollinators, and I'm pretty sure they're taking the sunlight away from them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
is that a problem?
Yeah. It's my lovely husband. He studied whether or not invasive species could affect the survival of native species by changing the shade environment. So yes, some species can be negatively impacted, especially if they thrive under high light conditions like raspberries. Low bush cranberry, they can survive lower light conditions for sure, but raspberries, they're open light. So yes, pollination, nobody has looked at it yet, but I would assume yes. They're smothered. Has anybody else seen that happening with the toppling? Those raspberry bushes, they grow in the same habitats, and they're great trellis for the vetch. The vetch have these little tendrils on it, and they can climb, and that's their strategy, is to overtop and get more light. And so, yeah. For sure.
I saw a lot of like rotten raspberries, like they were kind of just rotten underneath there, and then some that were like trying to poke out.
Huh. Yeah. I can imagine it being a lot damper under there too. Which would be a rot promoting environment. Those things are full of sugar and they rot very quickly. Huh. Cool. Write that one down, Christina. That's your next project. Cool. Yes.
In some summers, we have a lot of smoke.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if the smoke affects the physiology of the plant and maybe makes them bitter.
Huh.
Any research on that?
Not that I'm aware of. Oh, anything you're aware of?
I can imagine it doesn't.
Yeah.
I've not seen it being done.
Yeah. When I was in the 8th grade, I did an experiment on fast plants and put them in smoke. I made little domes, and my dad made me go into a gas station. He's not here, so I can tell this. He made me go into a gas station and try to buy cigarettes. as a kid, to see if they would sell them to me, and they did. I'm not gonna tell you which gas station. They're out of business now. And I looked at whether the fast plants were affected by the smoke environment of cigarette smoke. And I did not find an effect, as Carl is suggesting. That was on Brassica rapa, though. So I would say that it's probably not dense enough. The things that it could affect, I would imagine smoke has some effect on pollinators if it was thick enough. But the overall dry temperature, dry and hot, it would be hard to disentangle.
One more question.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yes.
When we had very heavy smoke in the area some years ago, it definitely affected my flowers. And I don't know I don't recall berries here that year, but I would think it would affect berries.
How did it affect your flowers?
They didn't do well, they dropped off the blossoms.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's really hard to tease apart without setting up an experiment. It's hard to tease apart the dry and hot from the smoke because they always come together in Fairbanks, So that's another experiment that we need to set up. Yeah, you got that. Carolyn's got it. She's got it.
Thank
you, Althea.
For a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Questions. Wonderful. Well, let's give her a round of applause. How many are going out berry picking this week?
Yes. How many are you going to send in observations of late blooming berry plants? If you see anything blooming while you're berry picking, please either you can send it directly to us and we'll submit it for you if you want.
Does it give you our GPS location?
No. Okay. Well, on Leo, don't submit it through Leo. Just submit a picture. Obscure it. Right, Blaine? You can obscure your observations. That's a good point.